Welcome back to the Chase MedSearch Podcast. My guest today is Tony Koop. Tony holds a bachelor's in science and mechanical engineering and an MBA. He's worked at multiple notable medical device companies such as J&J, Intuitive Surgical, B. Braun Medical, and Apollo Endosurgery. Tony's written a book entitled Discovering the Sale, DxB4Rx, and that's an equation we'll talk about. He's sold and managed teams that consistently drove double-digit growth year after year and has developed a teachable and duplicatable approach that is distinguished by its emphasis on thorough diagnosis of customer challenges before proposing solutions. Tony, welcome to the Chase MedSearch Podcast.
Thank you, Jordan. Great to be here.
Yeah. It's great to have you on. I'll let our listeners and those that are watching the video in on a little history between us. I have tried to recruit you multiple times, I think for more than a decade now, to various jobs, and never quite had the right job for you that you were interested in and intrigued in. But your resume, your pedigree, your experience, and just, the way that you come across has always been, to me, exactly who I wanted to place in the jobs that I had. So I at least I landed you on the podcast.
Well, timing is everything, right?
Yeah, it really is. Why did you decide to write a book?
Well, when I left B. Braun, and I had been thinking about my sales process all along, and all throughout my career, I've always heard sales leaders say, well, what made you successful, or how are you successful? And ask you those even their top sales reps, they'll ask, why were you so successful any given year? And very rarely could they give an answer because they were probably employing some of these techniques. But what I found was that as I started paying attention to my own process and then looking and doing postmortems on my wins and losses, I started to learn these duplicatable techniques that were my aha moments. And then I started training those with my teams that I've had, and they started having very similar successes as well. Mm-hmm. And so I said, when I had the opportunity to do something different in my career, the opportunity to write, I said, well, I should just write a book on this and try to capture everything I've done. And so my book will read like it's me talking to you as a rep in a way, because that's kind of how I handled it when I was writing it, and then go into some more details. So that's what helped me close the loop on why I should write this, because I think I got more to share.
Yeah. Who's your audience for this book?
There are two main audiences. One is companies that sell complex solutions to a complex buying process. Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about Hershey bars here. We're talking about, like medical devices, when you're trying to sell even more than one product within your portfolio to a hospital, or in non-medical devices, aerospace and defense, where I work, it was an entire software, hardware, and services type solution. Mm-hmm. So that's who the target is for where you would apply this. And then the users of it would be like a director of sales, a VP of sales, and the sales reps themselves. Because what this book does is it brings together and marries a vocabulary together for the sales leader with the sales rep. So when they do their monthly pipeline reviews, it makes sense to both of them exactly where a deal sits. So there's no surprises on the wins and the losses.
Yeah, that's great. I really enjoyed reading what I've read of it so far, because I love learning, and I love feeling like I'm actually getting a skill set or learning a skill set that I can then go out and apply. And I feel like it's a very practical book. It's well written, and there's so many things in there that I just pick up. But to your point, I grabbed that you want people to learn a more effective approach to essentially probing their customer, diagnosing their problem before prescribing the solution. And you talk about going on a probing quest. Tell us about that. What do you mean by a probing quest?
Yeah, when you're working with a customer and you're trying to have that consultative approach, The typical approach from most sales reps is they know all the features and benefits of their product and they just do a dump on the customer. And it's usually in one ear and out the other. Like they're really not paying attention because it's not hitting their need. And then you take it to the next level, which is like selling on value, where you're trying to bring a value to the customer of what the product can actually do for them from their business point of view. But again, it's just like throwing darts. Maybe it'll hit, maybe it won't resonate.
Mm-hmm.
And what this approach does is you have to do more work on the front end, which is what is the biggest challenge. The sales rep in the company, in the marketing department, need to help the reps understand the market better, or the customer, your own company better. Why was your product designed the way it was? And your competition, like what does the competition offer, and where are those gaps, and where can you play in the gaps there? And as you start to pull all those together, and you have that cohesive conversation with the customer, you're working with them on a probing that has everything to do with their business, which they are intimately familiar with, not just generically, but intimately familiar with. And I got some examples I go into in the book to really try to draw that out. And then you ask probing questions around that are usually once, twice, maybe even sometimes 3 times unrelated in a non-logical format to where you all eventually want to get back to, which is your product. But until you've identified their business, their true business issue, you can't ever, and it makes no sense to bring it back to your product, because it doesn't matter what your product is, they won't buy it.
Right. And I think something that resonates with me, and I know a lot of people, are just stories. And you have a great example in your book. I don't know if it's from real life or it's an amalgamation of, ride-alongs that you've had, but you've done so many as a sales manager. There's a rep, I think, Chaz, that you're riding around in the car with, and you are trying to coach this rep to actually do this process when you meet the customer. And they just sort of skitter off, and then you have to step in and help them a little bit. Tell us about that, because I think that helps ground in people's minds. I know it helped me what you're talking about when you say DxB4Rx.
Right. And so just to explain what DxB4Rx is, just real quickly, DX is a symbol used in medical for diagnose. It's a diagnosis. Rx is a prescription. So you're diagnosing before you prescribe a solution. And too many times reps hear a customer say something like, in my example I used in this book, I needed new containers to be able to sterilize my medical devices. And that's all the rep needed to hear. And every conversation from that point forward is about how we can go about getting a new container system in. And I'm trying to get the rep to back up a bit, because that's great that you have that. Use that as a basis point to build a vision around it, because what you can bring to the table is far more than just a container system. You can bring an entire solution that helps on many fronts. And let's use this opportunity to start establishing that vision. And you do that through probing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the example that I'm recalling, the rep heard one maybe pain point that the customer had and immediately wanted to go to the solution. And I think you're coaching them to step back and say, tell me more about that pain.
Yeah. And it's a really good example why I used it first, because it was how to do a multi-site conversion. So here we had one site showing one need for one product line that we would bring into the table. And the rep, being inexperienced, just wants to put that quote underneath the customer's nose as fast as possible, because they think that's good customer service. In reality, you're setting them up for a potential failure, because they're not looking at the bigger picture of how it relates to everything else. And so when he was about to push that quote underneath the customer's nose, I said, can I ask a couple questions before we do that? And that's all it took. And they're like, sure. And then you just go into the probing, and you start going into each of the products and the solutions that the company could bring to the table. And you start diving into each one enough to understand there's something there that they haven't considered, and how these all fit like an umbrella on top of itself, the vision, and how they all intermingle with each other. And so we did that for about an hour. We talked, and it was only about their problems. I didn't mention our products not one time in that entire hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, we're getting close to the meeting time, ready to go. And the rep keeps looking over me like, hey, when are we going to throw this quote across the table? And I said, we might not ever throw the quote across the table until we're ready for it.
Right.
But the one of the directors, the other directors that was in the meeting, so says, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about hardware or software or services or what? And I said, yes, all of that. And then I went through each one of their issues in a waterfall summary of, for this issue that you named, this is more of a software that we can bring to the table to manage and identify where all of your assets are. And for this other one, it's a container system that'll help you with efficiencies on these fronts and these problems that you're having and these costs. And from a product service point of view, we look at taking all this servicing of these devices in-house and we handle them all. So we got one point of contact. And so I went through all of those like that. And the director, was simple as that, went, oh, okay. And it was that was it. From that point on, the other director that was in the room stood up and said, hey, I got to go to another meeting. I want you to talk to so-and-so, which is this new director that they had hired of reprocessing departments. And she's over all of the hospitals. And so it went from just that one meeting, throwing one quote underneath their nose, to being a solution to all their problems that they were having across their entire IDN.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a multi-site conversion, which we launched first with a 5-site software solution. Yeah. And then it was going to move on to all these other topics as they made sense for the customer.
I think it's a really great example because there's multiple things to call out there. And one of the things that I really liked was you said, in the notes or whatever, we may not be the least expensive option.
Right.
But that's okay because you're solving multiple problems for them that they have that, if it's just evaluated on a straight up basis, like we do this and our competition does this, just a 1-point basis, you're not going to necessarily win that deal. But now you've taken the time to really diagnose them.
Well, when you understand what the customer needs, price becomes so little of a problem. It doesn't matter whether you're 20% high or 20% low. You just got to be the right solution. And if you can very easily get a 20% premium before upper management will say, well, what else is out there? Because when you start getting above 20% of the next best alternative, the customer wants to know a little bit more about why this is so much better that it's worth 20% more. Mm-hmm. But if you set the vision right, it'll be easily explainable by the champions that you've developed.
Yeah. And that's another thing you point out is that, evaluate this statement. My customer is driving the sale internally.
False.
What do you think of it?
False. That's the worst place you want to be as a sales rep.
Yeah.
You are driving the sale as a sales rep. That means you're developing and converting the technical champion and the economic champion.
Yep.
And when you have both of them on board, you've got a 98% chance of winning the deal. If you don't have one of those on board, you got about a 50%. So no, this whole 60, 75% chance of winning a deal, it doesn't exist. You're either going to win the deal or you're not. Mm-hmm. And so when you're trying to find a customer that says, okay, I'll send this up the chain internally, who knows how to present your solution better, you or your customer? So your customer doesn't. He's not quite there yet. He's developing into a champion. Eventually, maybe he might become one, but that can put some of the salient points, but never will be able to position him in such a way that you could as a sales rep if you're doing it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this question you put in. If your your statement, if your product is unique to the market and has a unique value proposition that you believe is better than the competition, then this approach is for you. That's a selling point on your book, right? I mean, but you have to believe that, and you have to know that that's true in a sense.
Right, and it's not just I believe it because my company's paying me. You've done your own research to find out, yes, this is the best solution out there for the customer. And sometimes a customer might have one of your products that you offer might be superior to your offering, but when you're selling the whole vision, that little bit of give and take that they make on buying your product over the competitions will pay off much more for them in the long run because they won't have multiple points of failure. They'll have one point of contact if there are issues. So you really got to look at, that's why you got to know your product so well. But if you're doing your job right as a sales rep and a marketing department, you're educating yourself and your team on how was this product designed, why was it designed, and what solution, what gap is it filling in the marketplace? And when you understand that, you set yourself up that now you can ask the proper probing questions and be more effective at converting the technical and economic champions to your camp, because they're there in every deal, but they may not be in your camp, and your job is to convert them to your camp, and then you win the deal.
How do you go about identifying, the technical champion and the economic champion? Because that seems to be, I think on the outside looking in, when I first started working with a lot of salespeople, I just thought it was patently obvious. Everybody knows, who to go to in the hospital. And it's really much, much more of a discovery process. And sometimes the people that you bet on may not be the right bets. So does your book help reps understand how to find out who really is the players and the movers and shakers in that institution or account?
It does. And the way you, in a nutshell, the way you do it is, just because the person's willing to meet with you does not make them the champion. They could become a champion if you develop them right. But the champion is the person that, if they said on a technical level, this is the solution we want to their uppers, there's no question. That's what they're going to go with. The economic champion is the person that says, I'm the one cutting the check. So I'm the one whose signature is required for this deal to go through. Now, sometimes that person is very outside of the technical realm, which is why you need to have an economic argument and a technical argument of why a customer is moving forward with a project. Mm-hmm. Because the economic guy will need that economic message of why it's better, whether from efficiency standpoint or cost savings, long-term value type approach, or it's just the right thing to do. Like, I use the example of putting in a sprinkler system. A company doesn't have a choice. It's part of OSHA standard. They have to have a fire suppression system. Well, this solution is more like, well, which one do we buy then? But they know they have to buy something. And a lot of times in the commercial world, you've got these companies that they've got this money. They have to do something with it to be able to make more money, either through efficiencies or expansion. And you've got the products that help them to do that. And so we'll get into it a little bit more later, but it's all about that having hand in the negotiation. Yeah. Is too many times the reps think, oh, they've got the control because they've got the money, and they really don't. Mm-hmm. You've got the control because you've got the product. And it's a mindset change. If you make that, it's so much easier to walk away from a deal.
That's pretty powerful, right? I mean, it's psychological. It's a psychological, I don't want to say it's a trick, but it's reversing your thought process on that. It makes a thought come to mind. I deal in the world of high technology, high end, right? Implantable, programmable technology. A lot of my work is there. And these are, expensive little devices, $22,000, $25,000 a piece. But in a certain segment of that market, if you talk to enough people, you'll just keep hearing the same message. The technology is all the same. There's really not that much differentiation between our product and our competitor's product and our third competitor's product and our fourth competitor's product. It's just all pretty much the same, even though it's high-end technology. In a world like that, and I know you've been in robotic surgery, you've been in startups, you've been in a lot of places. How do you coach your reps there through this probing process to kind of help them when they're feeling that way? They're feeling like, it's semantics, between these products or amongst this set. How do you coach reps to think differently there or see it differently through this probing process?
Yeah, and it really boils down to what is the value you're bringing to the market, to the patient in this case. And sometimes it might be a patient benefit. It might not benefit the hospital or the doctor at all, but if it benefits the patient, you're going to have the halo effect of the procedure, which is the patient's success is going to beget more word of mouth viral marketing, which is going to send more patients to your hospital. Mm-hmm. It could be you're less expensive. If we're all the same, then the cheapest one is the way to go, right? Mm-hmm. That'll be the default that purchasing will take. Mm-hmm. But if you've differentiated yourself, and you should have a differentiation, even if it's minor, it could be a major long-term outcome benefit. And you need to look at the 5-year cost of ownership of the device. What does it cost 5 years out? and start looking at that and start doing crunching those numbers with a customer. Um, and you can look at the hospital as a whole. Do they have a robust marketing campaign that might support us to be able to get the word out to our communities? And smaller competitors may not have that kind of budget. And again, if you're small, if all of the other qualities of the products lines are fairly equal, where there's not really a lot of discernment, then those kind of things can make a big difference in which one direction a hospital goes.
That's great. Wise words. One thing that struck me reading was do the work. That just thought kept coming back to me, especially around the 3 C's. And you point out, and maybe you can elaborate on that, what the 3 C's are, but it requires the rep to put in more work than they might be used to doing, but you will yield better results, extraordinary results that you're not used to seeing in some cases, right? So tell us about that work process.
It's the 3 C's are know your customer, know your company, and know your competition. So know your customer is the whole market, right? Not just that specific customer, but what does the market need? And then what does this specific customer need? Then know your competition is what are the gaps between what your competition will bring to the table, or even their lack of salesmanship may be able to be used as an advantage, because if their features and benefits selling and you're selling on a vision, you're going to win 10 out of 10 times. And then knowing your own company, your product, know your product and all the solutions it brings to the table. So this is where the wheels fall off, and it's the first place we start when we're trying to get someone over that hump of how to probe a customer directly and effectively. If you don't, so many times, and even I'm dealing with reps that have been with the company for 25 years, some of them don't know all of their products. They know some of their products really well, but they don't know all of their products, and so they don't sell them because they don't know them. And now you're missing out on real big opportunity for real growth within a company to hit those numbers every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you point out that some reps may not know exactly why that design is in there, or why that feature is in there, or why that benefit is there. And it's sort of like they're out there selling it, but they don't know all the reasons, all the ins and outs of why the design was made like that, right?
Yep, that's a great point. And the where the rep falls in a situation like that is they just became a walking, talking brochure. They're telling the customer nothing more than they get if they hit the website. And if you've got a sales team out there that's approaching their selling this way, you got a real education that needs to occur, and marketing needs to get heavily involved. And the importance of understanding the products and why they were designed the way they were to meet the market gaps is paramount. Because if a rep doesn't understand that, they'll never be able to get to a point where they ask a proper probing question. Yeah. And when you get to that point where you can ask probing questions that are really hitting the home runs with the customer because they are right in their backyard, you're going to start getting the customer engaged. They're going to start pulling you into the process because now you're a solution guy for them.
Right.
And you're going to set yourself up to be the go-to guy for whatever questions or issues they may have.
There was something you said in there about, do you have confidence in your current pipeline? And,
yes.
Or do you significantly filter the expected deals coming in each month for a more realistic representation of deals that are actually closable? I thought of so many sales managers when I worked very closely with them in human resources at the end of the month or into the quarter, who were just sweating it out because they didn't have confidence in what their reps had told them or what they thought was in their pipeline. And I think this process, you argue, is going to help alleviate a lot of that stress. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it does. And what's the result of when you're at the end of a quarter or end of a year and you're trying to hit your number and you don't know what deals are going to come in? You drop your price as an incentive to close by the end of the year, which only sets you up for having to give a bigger discount next year. So that was only good last year. Well, if it was good last year, it's good this year, right? That's an easy comeback for the customer, and they got you checkmated. So rather than do that, come at grading your pipeline much more pragmatically.
Yeah.
And you're looking at each individual deal. And if you look at a deal pragmatically, like I said before, there's a technical and an economic champion in every deal, especially if it's over 10 grand. There's always one of each. And if you haven't won both of them over, you will not have a chance of winning the deal. At best, you have a 50% chance. Let's say you win over the technical champion, but the economic guy just sits on the deal because they don't know why they're buying that, and they don't want to spend the money this year, so they don't buy it. And then you just sit to the next year. So you go from December to February before you can actually potentially win that deal, or maybe not at all.
Yeah.
And so as you're trying to grade your pipeline, some communication can occur between the sales manager and the sales rep that's equally advantageous to both. So when you say, I have a technical champion lined up, it's not just a name. I could text that guy or that person right now, and they'll text me back or call me back, because they're that in tune with that's a champion, because they're feeding you inside information on what's going on in the politics, which is a whole nother part of the 3 Ps that I go into also. The people, the process, and the politics. But and then when you have that person lined up, that's half the battle is won. Then you do the same thing with the economic champion. You explain why the technical champion needs the product. And then this is for the advantages economically that you get when you get this to come across your desk, why you should sign it as soon as possible. And so you set yourself up for that bigger solution sale, because if they decide they don't want to do, if you've set up an entire vision with the customer and done it right, if they kick out like, oh, we're not going to do that this year, we're going to buy these other guys. Well, they've given up on a lot of the other vision that you've created. And a lot of customers don't want to give that up once they see the vision and they're part of it. And they see where we can take this, because now they've got justification for the budgets they've had so hard time to get approved over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, that was another great point that you made was the two halves of the brain, the way people think. There's the rational component and there's an emotional component. And if you're doing a good job probing with the customer, you're uncovering their sort of pain points or their emotional responses along with their rational thoughts. And then you can kind of create your solution or craft it that's addressing both those needs. Talk a little bit about that, because I thought that was interesting.
A good way to look at it is the emotional brain is what actually commits to the deal, commits to you of being your champion as a sales rep. That's the emotional brain, because they've heard enough about how this is going to improve my life or my department or my department team members' life. And that's going to make everybody better, right? It's going to make my whole world better if we do this. The technical side is the rational brain is what the technical side more focuses on. The rational brain is what's going to give them the justification to sell their upper management on the deal internally. So if they're the ones talking about the project internally, they can give the technical reasons, but the emotional side is why they're behind it, why they're behind the solution for you.
Yeah. Something you mentioned in there that I don't think I'd thought about is when one of your examples is when, for instance, the sets were getting compromised and there were issues and it caused a lot of after hours work. And then they started having attrition problems. They started having turnover with the staff, because they were like, this place is just ridiculous. It's out of control. I can't dedicate all these hours. And then you start probing more and you start uncovering how that affects the rest of the team. And now you're talking to your champions and they're like, they would really like to solve that fast. And it might be even more important to them than the economic side of it, because they're losing people and surgeons are frustrated.
You're right. That is like the other side of the hidden paycheck side of the equation, where the customer is losing because they have to retrain someone new every 6 months. And that's a high cost to them, but it doesn't necessarily, they don't see it as costing them money. They just got to replace a headcount, or sometimes they don't replace the headcount and then they put more work on the people that are there and eventually they lose them. Right. So then they kind of create a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. And so when a company is looking at big solution, and you're going through all that discussion. Like one example I gave in the book was a customer that wasn't really thinking about themselves because they're afraid to think about themselves on a selfish standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But deep down inside, that's what they're doing. So they don't want to do the project because they see it's going to be more work for them. It's change.
Mm-hmm.
But if they could see that, hey, I missed 4 of my kids' baseball games last year because of having to stay late because the washer pump went down and we had to hand wash all of these containers and such, then that becomes a real issue that's affecting their personal life. But you'll never know that if you don't know that washer pumps go down because of plastic pieces from the locks that wash out into the system and jam up the impeller, right? But it's completely unrelated to a container and a lock system because that's not what it's designed for. But that's what's causing a downline issue in their process, which then slows everything down. And now everybody has to stay overtime so they can get everything through the washers and then get the sets built and then get them into the autoclave for the cases for the next day. So when you really understand the customer's process, you can back things out and see ahead as you're asking these questions, these probing questions that seemingly are unrelated to a container system or whatever product you're trying to sell.
A thought occurred to me when I was reading it about some business that I won recently, actually, with a customer around the new year. And all I did was listen to them. That's it. They called, they talked, and I listened to them. And about halfway through the conversation, the person said, I already know I want to work with you. And I said, how? And she said, because of all the recruiters I've talked to, you're the only one that listens. You don't overtalk. You don't interrupt me. It's the simplest thing. Is there something to this probing art that do you think the customer begins to feel like you actually care about them through this process versus making it more transactional?
You hit it right on the head. It is. You're showing your customer that you care about them. Mm-hmm. Because when you're dumping features and benefits and what kind of solution this can bring to the company as a whole, instead of how it affects them and their department and their problems that they're challenged with year to year. The probing piece is, if you've done it right, you've talked for an hour and you've never brought up your product once or a feature or benefit of your product once. You're only talking about their problems. And that's the only place you're going to find the justification for the project is in the answer to those probing questions. So if you've probed right, the justification becomes obvious to the customer. And then they get emotionally behind it. And now you've got a winning combination to move forward with.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of economic pressure on hospitals and in surgery centers and customers, doctors losing or having the reimbursement reduced, all kinds of stuff over the last 10, 15, 20 years or so. It's been going that direction. And along with that, what I think I've seen is less of a desire for reps that fly by the seat of their pants into accounts and customers and make hay and all of that and get some wins quick. I mean, those days are rapidly going the way of the dinosaur. And you talk about the fact that here with this process, you can actually map it. You can actually develop and create a map of the sales process. Talk about that, because that really resonated with me.
Sure. Yeah. The map that I put together is as simple as you be able to carry it and be able to picture it in your mind. It's not very complex. And the beauty of it is it doesn't have to go in the order that it's shown on the map. Like you can be working with an economic champion one day and a technical champion the other, and you can be working on probing and with one customer and converting another at the same time. And then when you're doing your waterfall summaries with each, they're going to be different waterfall summaries. So you can't just think that one answer will be suffice to everyone. So you're working on these waterfall summaries that you do, and then that brings you into that yes, no. Are they a champion or are they not? Have they bought into you and support you, or have they not? And it becomes pretty simple. When you have them both, you win. And when you don't have one of them, you might win 50% of the time. But if you don't have either And you got to be honest with yourself about that when you're talking to your boss and vice versa. If you don't have either, you've got no chance of that deal coming in. So when we get back to that pragmatic pipeline approach, if you're talking with your boss on a monthly basis of this is the, or quarterly basis or yearly basis, here's the deals that I expect to come in. If you haven't been honest with yourself, you're just gonna have to make stuff up and make a champion up with your boss, and that will be very evident that you were not doing your job by the time you get to the end of the quarter and the deals don't happen. Everything can push a month. That's not unusual. But when it pushes 2 or 3 months, you're not selling right, and then sales is stressful if you're not selling right. Sales is fun if you're doing it right. It's fun. You can't wait to get out of bed and get out there with the customers.
Yeah. And it seems to eliminate some of the mystery of what you should do. I think a lot of stress is created by uncertainty between managers and sales reps. At least that's my observation. Expectations aren't clearly communicated and then coached toward, a lot of times in a supportive manner. And I think a lot of reps really just want clarity. They want clarity of purpose. They want clarity of expectations from the manager. And here you've got a collaborative process that you two can work together on, and map this out, and you can coach to it and say, well, hey, you can ask your rep probing questions, right?
That's right. And it's a fair game. It's fair for a manager to say, what's the vision that this customer is operating under? And it should be the customer's vision, not your idea of what the vision should be. The customer has to articulate that to you. And then you say, well, who articulated that to you? Right. And you start challenging them, and all of a sudden the wheels fall off really quick if they don't have a name. Whoa, who's that name? Joe? Okay. Can you text Joe real quick and ask him if he and I can meet? Joe will never respond because Joe's not a champion, but a champion will, right?
Yeah.
And likewise the other way around, when a manager's saying, I need that deal. What do we need to do to make that deal come in this month? And you say, well, neither champion has developed yet. This is 3 months down the road. Well, what do we need to do to make it come in this month? Yeah. And then you can say, well, price discounts are about the only thing you can offer, but then you don't expect to get the price back up after you've given them a discount.
Right. Yep. You open that door, it's not shutting ever. Yeah.
Sometimes it's better to lose the deal or not win a deal than it is to win a bad deal.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Evaluate this statement for me. I had an up year last year, so this year is going to be down. There's just nothing I can do about it.
Yep. This one was like nails on a chalkboard for me, or a screeching record, because if you're doing it right, what you says, I had an up year this year and a down year. I'll have a down year this next year. That's telling me you're going to the same well every year. You're not going out to new customers. And the same customer isn't going to buy a brand new solution that you bring to the table every year. They're not going to do it. So if you are only winning those customers, having a good year every third year, chances are you're going to the same customers time and time again, instead of going to all of your customers and working the angle.
Yeah. So you've hired a lot of people. In all sorts of different companies. When you're interviewing someone, what kind of raw material are you looking for in an interviewee? Because they're not born knowing how to do this. They may never have heard of this approach. They may have some skills, but they don't have this. Tell me, when someone's sitting on the other side of the desk and you're looking to hire someone, how are you evaluating? What are you looking for? What matters to you that can work in this framework?
Yeah, I have several things that I look for, and some are tangible, some are intangible. Number one, I look for tenacity, because I can't teach tenacity. You either have the drive to want to get better, to want to get out there and show up, or you don't. And then I look for the skill set of probing, like in the interview process. Are you asking me questions? And I know a lot of the reps that I interview are really new. Some of them have had no experience.
Yeah.
Right. So I give a lot of grace in those situations, and I'll tell them what I'm looking for. If they're smart enough to ask me, what am I using? What is the basis for my decision? I tell them as black and white as I can, the 6 things that I look for. And then I harp on probing, because I want them to probe each of those 6 things, because that's you're trying to convert me into becoming your champion on this deal right now. And I help them, right? And if they don't pick up on it, I usually give them a second chance. And even at the end of the interview, and they say how'd it go or whatever, I'll say, well, you didn't do this, and I'll tell them like, hey, you fell on your face when it came to probing, and the opportunity to probe. And the ones that say, well, can I try it again? I love it. I love it when they do that, because that shows humility and that they're willing to learn and able to learn. Yeah. But if they get really defensive, that kind of is a red flag to me that, hey, they're probably not going to be someone that'll take direction well.
That's a really salient point. I like that a lot. Can I do it again? Can I try it again? You
Yeah.
know, I mean, how many times do you have to walk back in a customer again? And you're there again week after week after week, and it hasn't quite popped yet, you know?
Yeah. I actually fell on my face in my intuitive surgical interview, and the guy said, he goes, I just don't think you're, whatever the fit, whatever. And I said, well, tell me why. And then I said, well, and it was probing. And I said, well, can I try it again? And so I tried it again, and I got hired, and I thought, well, that was a learning moment for me,
Yeah. Oh, that's great. They say in Hollywood, it takes 15 years to become an overnight success. I love that you put that quote in there. How long did it take you to feel like you were having success?
Yeah, I started seeing success at about the 12-year mark, and then starting to get that confidence level. But it wasn't until about the 15-year mark in sales that I started to really get the big picture, like how all things have to happen this way. Like you have to have a technical champion. You have to have an economic champion. You have to create a vision that's beyond the product line that you're trying to sell. You have to create that waterfall summary of the vision for the customer to allow them a chance to get emotionally involved. And then you got to know the 3 Ps, the people, the process, and the politics that are going on behind the scenes, because that will kill a deal pretty quick too. And you start to know how to play those roles with each of those agents in the buying process. And when I started doing all that, and things really started to gel, that's about the time I was getting into leadership roles. And my 3 leadership roles I held, we had tremendous success, because when I can truncate someone's 15-year experience of hard knocks in the school of hard knocks, and you truncate it into 6 months or a year of looking at the solution a little differently, looking at the conversation with the customer a little differently, you start seeing really dramatic improvements pretty quick. And then the confidence level goes up, which is really huge. Because if you have competence with confidence, the competence on the product and the market and all that, and confidence in your own self and the ability to have that conversation, you've got a real equation there for success, to be able to diagnose before you prescribe a solution. You don't fall into that, I got to prescribe because that's what the customer has me here. That's why I'm here, is to prescribe a solution. Well, if you don't know if you haven't diagnosed the problem yet and had the patience to do it right, you're losing the opportunity to build a vision.
Absolutely. When's the book coming out? Any timeline? When can people get their hands on it? Can they pre-order it?
I'm going to probably be starting up a website with a monthly or bi-monthly newsletter, and maybe even some blogs like this I'll be putting in it, and try to get people hip with the ideas that are the concepts that are being delivered. And once that is all gelled, the book is, I'd say, 96% done. I might put in one more chapter, and I still got to do my copy edits. But I'm working with a university locally here that's helping me with the marketing side and the artwork. So hopefully in 2025, I can launch the book, but probably not before mid-year. I wouldn't think.
It sounds like there will be tools and resources in advance anyway. So that's good.
So when I get my website up and running for the newsletter, I'll let you know, and you can tag it to this video, and people can have a place to find me.
That's great. Are you open to people connecting with you on LinkedIn or reaching out if they've got questions or anything like that?
I sure am. I'm open to helping customers that want to start this process now before my book comes out. And they can reach out to me, and I can become a fractional VP of sales, or someone that just comes in to help consult with them and get them up and running in the right way, so they can get out of this spiraling drain of features and benefit selling and get into selling at a more probative level and more impactful level.
That's great. Well, we'll have you back when the book launches, okay?
Okay.
Or before. Thank you for being on today, Tony. It's been a pleasure.
I appreciate the opportunity and thank you very much.
That's great.